Hey everybody, welcome back. Today I want to talk about the importance of doing your website project right the first time. This is a bit of a cautionary tale, but just based on some conversations I had recently, it was top of mind, and I wanted to talk on this subject for a little bit. So what we will run into frequently when we're talking with prospective clients about projects is scenarios where someone tried to do a project on the cheap and is now in a position of having to do that project over. I think there's a famous saying, there's never time to do it right, but there's always time to do it over. And we see that to no end, I think, in our world. And I want to encourage you not to do that, essentially, and to help yourself not do that, consider a few of these factors when you are thinking about a project and when you are considering that that solution that seems like it's going to magically let you do this on the sly. Give it a second hard look to make sure that you're not deceiving yourself and setting yourself up for failure in the long run. So the first thing I want to talk about is just immediate costs. If you are trying to tackle a project and that project is a failure and you have to do it over, you essentially can double your cost right there. In terms of the initial investment you made, it can be entirely wasted, and you can find yourself in a position of just having to do the project over. This happens, I think, perhaps more often than you would think, but it's a very real scenario that's out there, and it's one that we hear about occasionally. I think that's kind of like the obvious scenario, but there are a couple others that I want to draw some attention to. One is a scenario that I'm going to call just long-term unsustainability. And this is almost more dangerous. It's when your project isn't an immediate failure. It functions, you get it up and running, and you're like, okay, hey, we got there, whatever, it's not perfect. We'll often see that people will take something that was adequate but not fundamentally sound, and they'll continue developing, adding on to it, building more features, etc. And this is not a knock on agile development. I think agile development's a great thing. You kind of evolve a product from your minimum viable product towards something that has everything that you need long term. I think that's a great way to go about development. You want to be careful, though, that you're not essentially hack fixing something together where you're continually just putting another patch on it, hacking something else into it to keep it going. If what you're building isn't fundamentally sound, if you're not building something that you've taken the time to make sure that it's going to be sustainable for the long run, you can find yourself in a position where over a period of years, you've put a large investment into something, a little bit at a time, and it's grown, and now that it's really at the point of failure and it's time to do a rebuild of your system, that you look at the cost to replace, and you've built so many things onto it that the cost of replacing it, when you look at it now taken as a whole, you can't just do it a little piece at a time. If you're going to replace it, you have to replace the whole thing at once. That cost can be worth more than the value of what you have. And you find yourself in a position where it's not worth it to make that investment, and the project has essentially run its life cycle, but now it's just dead. At the end of it, you don't have an asset that you've invested in, you've just sunk money into a liability. So when you are working on something, bear that in mind. Make sure you're not building something where someday you're going to look at this and go, wow, we just have to tear this whole thing out by the roots and start over, because when you look at that start over cost, it just may not be viable, especially if you've continued developing on top of that foundation. Finally, just think about what I'm going to call price versus cost, or opportunity cost for your project. So there's that immediate cost of, if your project's a failure and you've got to do it over again, well, what does that cost you? And in some cases, people go, well, this other solution's so much cheaper, it's not that big of a deal. If it doesn't work, we'll just try again, and we'll take the more expensive option the second time. Okay. if what you're building is in any way critical to the functioning of your business or your organization, do you use it to generate leads, for sales? Is this an e-commerce site? Is this a tool that your team or that your customers are potentially going to use? Does it impact your work or your working relationships? You want to think about not just what the price of the good that you're buying is when you're comparing two things, but what are the compounded costs if what you do is unsuccessful year over year, and how much greater is that cost potentially than the price of the thing that you're initially buying? Because I think the temptation is to look at the price and say, oh, this is X $1,000 and this is Y $1,000, and X is greater than Y. If I go with Y, I'm going to save delta between X and Y. And immediately that may be true, but if X is a superior product to Y, then in the long run, that adds up. And the cost is going to catch up with you, and while one option looked cheaper at the start, at the end of the day, it wasn't the price that got you, it was the long-term cost of dealing with the inferior solution. So that's the topic for today, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it. Feel free to leave a comment, and look forward to talking to you guys next time. Thanks.